Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Welcome to Mission Evolution, the show that explores the evolution of consciousness and the human experience. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Preston Dennett, a respected UFO researcher, field investigator, and prolific author whose work has illuminated the mysteries of extraterrestrial encounters and the paranormal. Since 1986, Preston has investigated hundreds of USO cases, near-death experiences, and unexplained phenomenon. Curating them in more than 30 books and countless articles, his research offers profound insights into how contact with non-human intelligence may be transforming both individuals and the collective human spirit. Join us as we journey into the extraordinary with Preston Dennett to uncover these encounters and what they reveal about our evolution as a species. To learn more, visit prestondennett.weebly.com. Preston, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
It's a pleasure and an honor. Thanks for having me.
Preston, how did you get involved in UFO research and alien abductions?
Involuntarily, actually, kind of kicking and screaming, really. This was not something I was looking for. I was very skeptical. That all changed when I was a pretty young man, 1986. I was 21 years old. I can actually pinpoint the exact date. It was November 17. The news came on, and it portrayed an interesting news story about a Japanese commercial airline which had encountered a UFO over Alaska. It's now a very famous case, but at the time, this news report was very kind of joking, tongue-in-cheek. They laughed about it and moved on. But I remember they showed the picture of this pilot, Captain Kenju Torochi, and I thought to myself, wow, this guy's going to lose his job. What did he see? Was it a reflection off the ice cap? I was kind of just making up ridiculous explanations without having done any research. But it reminded me that my older brother, Mark, had come running into the house when I was about 13 years old, claiming to have seen a UFO. I didn't believe him at the time, but hearing this news report really got me thinking about that. And so I asked him to tell me that story again, and he really knocked my socks off. He described this having seen a very classic flying saucer, metallic, colored lights, a dome on top, totally silent, treetop level, and he chased it in his car. This was in LA, Southern California area. He had two friends with him who I knew well, Phil and Greg. And so he's like, if you don't believe me, call them, and gave me their numbers. And they, of course, confirmed his sighting. That's kind of what got the ball rolling for me. But what a shock it was to find out that I knew many people, I would say about 30%, 40 almost, had some kind of unexplained experience. So, yeah, it was a real shock and a very difficult adjustment.
How many people have had a sighting or experienced a UFO abduction?
Well, it's interesting because there's some controversy surrounding that. It used to be thought of as very rare, but some surveys show it's actually pretty common. Initially, I heard J. Allen Hynek, who's very well known in this field. He was part of Project Blue Book, the astronomical consultant, and eventually kind of defected and started writing his own books about this subject. He's quoted as saying 1 in 40 people have been on board a UFO. I heard that very early on, and I thought, no way, that's impossible. That would be millions of people. That would mean I would know someone who's had that experience, because I think we all know 40 people. So I started asking everyone I knew, and I didn't have to ask 40 people. I found 5 people who kind of fit the bill. So I wrote an article about that for the MUFON Journal, kind of surveilling other major researchers who were calling it an invisible epidemic. And it was in 1991 that the Roper organization, a major polling organization, conducted a survey, asked thousands of people with some hidden questions in there, and they found that 1 in 40 people show the one in 50 people show the markers of being a UFO contactee. So yeah, I think it's a lot more common. It's just that most people don't talk about it, especially if you have an onboard experience or you see humanoids. Having interviewed hundreds of people, I always ask them that. Did you call the police? Did you report it to a UFO organization? I'm being generous when I say 1 in 100 have reported it officially. Almost nobody reports it.
Mm. So, what's the typical mode of interstellar or interdimensional transportation used by our aliens?
Trick question, kind of. I think that once they're over our planet, they're basically, because many contactees have been taken on board and told exactly how this works. When they're traveling around our planet, they're basically harnessing our gravitational magnetic field lines, sort of kind of anti-gravity. People come up with different variations of this, but it's generally along those lines. But in terms of interstellar distances, almost always people describe interdimensional travel. So they're not traveling faster than light or anything like that. Basically, they are able to slip out of the third dimension into the fourth, perhaps the fifth, and pop out in any desired location in this universe, I guess you would say. But yeah, that's pretty consistent in terms of contactees who've been able to get information on that. And people sometimes ask me, well, how do you know they're extraterrestrial or are they interdimensional? I would say that, one does not preclude the other, because we ourselves are interdimensional beings. I know you know this, having looked at some of your research, but we survive, death, near-death experiences. All this points to us being interdimensional beings, and certainly the ETs are as well, and have a much greater understanding, I think, and use of the other dimensions. They know a lot more than we do.
I know that NASA has been studying what they call X points, and they're created every place the electromagnetic field of the planet crosses with that of the
Do
sun.
more research to really confirm that. But it's interesting because there are certain areas on our planet which seem to be what we would call UFO hotspots. Sedona, Arizona is often cited, but San Luis Valley, Colorado, California has a huge hotspot in the Santa Monica Mountains and other areas. And there's some kind of preliminary research, I would say, pointing towards the possibility that these are what you're talking about, areas with high magnetic field lines or gravitational magnetic field lines, or vortexes. Some have used that word, which is kind of vague and not fully scientifically confirmed. But yeah, there's some research pointing towards that, I think. Lots of questions still surrounding this subject, which is why research is so important and so hard to move forward with this, basically a worldwide government cover-up, suppression of UFO information, disinformation. It's a bit of a mess trying to move this subject forward.
Yeah, I would think. I would think. What are the alien? Why are they abducting people? What's the point?
Yeah, $1 million question, but I think we've started to get a really good handle on this. Having interviewed hundreds of people who've had this experience and read every book I can get my hands on, what I've found out is pretty much being confirmed by other major researchers, specifically those who concentrate or focus on people who are being taken on board. Because of course there's many different aspects of research you can go into. But we now know enough to basically predict what's going to happen to a person when they're taken on board. And I think it really speaks to why this is happening to people. One thing we do know is it's generational. So they seem to be following certain family lines and perhaps have an interest in their genetics for some reason. So there does seem to be a real strong interest in that area, which is one of the reasons I think people are being taken on board. I can say that healing, physical healing, is a big part of the ET agenda. This is not speculation. This is demonstrably proven through the firsthand accounts people being physically examined and often healed. Been a lot of research into this. Edith Fiore, one of the first persons with a PhD to write about this subject, said that fully half of her clients had experienced healings, which is what Ray Hernandez found in his free study. MUFON did a study, Mutual UFO Network, and found closer to 10 or 20%. But I can tell you that pretty much every major researcher out there has multiple cases of this kind. John Mack, David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins, Jacques Vallée, Brad Steiger, Timothy Beckley, Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith. I could go on. I've covered many cases myself, and I ended up writing a book documenting some 300 cases of this. So that's absolutely one of their agendas. But I'd say there's like 5 major agendas that they have. Another is just to basically provide information for people. Because when people have an onboard experience and they're not in complete terror or panic, and because when they are, they essentially have missing time and they don't really recall a whole lot. But those who don't react with fear are typically given a tour of the craft, and they'll take you down to the engine room and they'll explain exactly how these craft are powered, or they'll take you up to the control room and say, this is how we steer the craft. It actually sits you in the pilot seat, and it's generally psychically. When anyone gets any communication from ETs beyond, don't be afraid, we're not here to hurt you, you're fine, you'll be home soon, they give messages and warnings that fall into just a few categories, and it's very consistent and has been since the modern age of UFOs. It's warnings about nuclear proliferation, warnings about war and aggression, greed and corruption, pollution, and the destruction of the environment. So that's clearly one of their major concerns, is how we treat ourselves, each other, and this planet. Another, one more, I think that's very important to put forth, is that they seem to be very interested in elevating our psychic abilities. Because almost without exception, contactees have an enormous amount of psychic abilities, particularly following their encounter, but sometimes before. It's kind of a two-way street there. But healing, hands-on healing, astral projection, mediumship, clairvoyance, precognition, all of this manifests very strongly following an experience. So it's pretty clear to me that's a factor here.
It's enough to make you wonder if we weren't seeded here and they're following up when they follow the genetic line.
Yeah, there might be some evidence of that, because we do know, just based on historical records, that this phenomena, for lack of a better word, does go back to at least prehistory, and probably before that, because we have, stone carvings and hieroglyphs and writings of ancient India and so forth. They've been around forever, and many contactees have been told that at one point we lived on Mars.
It's time we're going to have to take a station break. Preston and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Are all aliens created equal? With us this hour discussing alien abductions is UFO researcher Preston Dennett. Preston, how many different kinds of aliens are visiting the Earth?
Seems like it's almost endless. It's very interesting to me, because this is one of the things that kind of kept me out of UFO research, is it sounded very Star Trek-y to me, with almost all reports being of what we would call humanoids. Basically bipedal beings, arms, legs, head. But that's what we're kind of stuck with. That's what the reports are showing us. Almost all of them are humanoid in form. There are some definite major types. Grays really dominate. In my own research, it's over 50%. people will describe some variation of the short little beings with large heads and large dark eyes, bald, grayish skin. But even there's a huge variation, because some will say, oh, they were chalk white, gray, tan, yellowish blue. You get all these different skin complexions. Then, of course, there's human-looking ETs, and I'd say that's the second most common category, people that look very much like us, though usually described as being a little taller, perhaps 6 feet, very muscular, often very good-looking or beautiful. Praying mantis is another type, tall whites, little short blue beings. Variation goes on from there, strange humanoids of all kinds. And it's so interesting to me because, coming from a contactee angle, some contactees have asked about this. And a message they often get is that we all share a common ancestry. The ETs will say something like, I am you, you are us, we are one, this sort of thing. And from some contactees who are what I would call fully conscious contactees, and they've overcome the fear. They don't need hypnosis. They have long interactive conversations. I met one lady, Dolly Safran, wrote a book about her. She dug into this particular question deeply and was told basically that we all share essentially the same genetics. We're all basically human, but what we're seeing is just ancestry, differences in, caused by the environment we live in, but all essentially the same species, which would make sense considering, people report grays hybridizing with humans. You'd have to be the same species to be able to do that. But yeah, that's a message a lot of contactees get. So I'm leaning towards that our relationship with them is far closer than we perhaps previously believed, particularly because some do look just like us.
That would kind of explain the reason that they might be fascinated in us, and it kind of lends itself towards the we were seated here to start out with, doesn't it?
It sure does. And it's interesting because the idea that we evolved on this planet or started on this planet is certainly the mainstream paradigm that we're being taught in schools. But that's not what the contactees are being told. Humanity is throughout the universe. And as I mentioned earlier, a number of contactees say that we actually lived on Mars and were brought to Earth and are lifted off periodically when there are natural cycles of existential crises with pole tilts and things like this. So which there's some good evidence for. Michael Cremo, anthropologist, his book Forbidden Archaeology really lays it out in black and white that there have been previous iterations of advanced societies on our planet. So it's very interesting.
So if we're looking for the missing link, we're going to be looking a long time.
I think so. That's what I think is so interesting about this subject is it has so much to teach us. It offers such a great opportunity to expand our knowledge.
Mm. How do you know that stories of abductions are not hypnotically retrieved fantasies or false memories?
I'm glad you asked that question because there's a lot of, I think, misconceptions about it, a lot of confusion. In my own research, I've stayed away from hypnosis. In my books, and I've written a number of them about this particular subject, I would say about 10 to 20% of people have used hypnosis, and every single one of their cases stands up without it. So any claims that this can be explained by false memory syndrome, as it's called, does not hold water. Now, hypnosis has been proven repeatedly to be unreliable in terms of getting memories back if used incorrectly. Because on the other hand, there are numerous studies that show that it's absolutely very useful to retrieve information accurately. And I can say with absolute confidence that those who recall their memories through the use of hypnotic regression, the details that they recall match precisely what those who have fully conscious experiences recall. So there's no major difference between the two, which I think really argues for the fact that this does work when used correctly. So I absolutely do support hypnosis, but I generally don't recommend it unless a person has debilitating anxiety, perhaps, or a very clear-cut case of missing time that they can point to, because there are some hidden dangers there. And people I've talked to who have gone through hypnosis, some have regretted it because they felt like, well, the memories they're hypnotically recalled, they're a little bit different. Whereas a number of people at some point, and this can happen, days after, weeks after, or even years, will get some sort of cue or trigger. They'll see the cover of Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, and tell you how many people have told me, like, oh, that brought back my memories of my experiences. So that can happen. You can recall through dreams and meditation as well. And I always recommend that first before a person uses hypnosis. But yeah, it works. It absolutely, I think, is a reliable tool done right.
Do you think that people, or is there evidence that that the memories are blocked by the ETs, or is it possibly just traumatic um, to the
Yeah.
person, so they block it?
Yeah, for a very long time when I got into UFO research, I was blaming the ETs. Like, it's them doing it. But if you look into the research of trauma, when someone has it, you'll see that amnesia or memory problems pops up pretty consistently, whether it's childhood abuse or war trauma victims or even car accidents. Any type of trauma, assault, can be blocked by a person. I think it's essentially our own human mind doing it to protect the individual. So I've come to realize that it's somewhat of a two-way street, because certainly there are cases where ETs will tell people, you're not going to remember this, or you will remember it as a dream, or you will remember it when it's time. So I think in some cases, what's really going on here is if a person is having a very difficult time processing the experience, they will facilitate you not remembering, because I don't think that's their purpose, to scare people. Or the first thing they say is, have no fear, you will not be hurt. But we have such a strong fear reaction. Totally understandable. And I can only imagine what it must be like to wake up and see grays in your bedroom, or be on a table in an unusual place and ETs are examining you. So I think it's difficult for people to remember. And there's another factor going on here, because when people are brought on board or taken down, it appears that it's done through this kind of interdimensional beam, because they're pulled through the walls, the ceiling, and it's much like waking up from a dream, kind of. You know how dreams kind of slip away very easily? It's, I think, a very similar process, or that would be a fair analogy on how it can be difficult to remember these experiences. So yeah, I think it's a two-way street, honestly.
Do you suppose that the trauma that abductees experience is actually the challenge to their concept of reality?
Oh yeah, yeah, almost without exception. When someone has a contact experience, it changes everything. It is a peak experience in their lives. It affects them on multiple levels: physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, psychically. It is an absolute life-changing experience. So for some people, they're just like, no, I can't deal with this. This is it's a process for most people. And I absolutely see this pattern. It can be so frightening in the beginning. People will suffer from PTSD, clinical PTSD.
Mm.
They have insomnia. They have to sleep with the lights on. They lock all the doors. They have a fear of intruders. But as they're brought on again, on board, and they realize, well, they just healed me, or they told me all this information that will give predictions to people. People start to come around. So in my own files, about 70 to 80% say it's kind of a mixed bag in the beginning, but after they get through the fear, they would not change it for anything. I would say about 10% was like, no, I don't like this experience. I wish it never happened. It's been very traumatic for me, and I don't like it. So yeah, there's kind of a bell curve there of how people process this.
We're talking they travel interdimensionally. Do you suppose that this means also that they go backwards and forwards in time, and that's where the predictions come from?
I am not sure I'm willing to go that far. Absolutely, they do provide predictions over and over again, some of which have absolutely come true. And they can do things with time that we don't understand, because it's not at all unusual for a person to have an experience, be pulled from their bedroom or their car while driving, have an hour-long experience, and come back and only minutes have passed. I have a number of cases where people, one gentleman I interviewed, for example, in the Ozarks, whole family was there when a UFO showed up. He ran inside to get a telescope or binoculars and came outside, and his whole family was frozen. They weren't moving. In fact, his father was holding a bucket of milk and it was spilling over, and he's looking at it like, how can this possibly be? Because he could move. And looking down his driveway, he saw that the UFO that had been in the sky had now landed, and these grays were walking towards him. They had somehow, it looked to him like they'd stopped time. Got a lot of cases of this, and I don't think they're stopping time at all, because you can't stop time throughout the universe. That makes zero sense. But I think what they're doing, and I'm speculating here a little bit, is that they're pulling people out of the third dimension, perhaps, into the fourth, where time flows differently, or somehow they're pulling people out of our time stream, because they absolutely can do that.
That would go back to the X point theory, because that's supposed to be wormholes through time and space.
Yeah, we have a lot to unpack with this particular aspect, because it's really remarkable, because there are cases of people who essentially said that they were shown past events, not so much traveling back in time. There's a theory that, oh, they're us from the future. I dug deep into that theory, and I could not find cases to really support that I found to be credible. So I don't think that's what's going on here. But they are very perceptive psychically. Their psychic abilities are incredibly advanced. So I think that they have precognition as a tool that we ourselves have and can be developed. And as I said, many contactees will start experiencing these kinds of psychic abilities.
Well, it's about that magic moment. We're going to have another station break. Preston and I will be right back to continue our discussion, so please stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Why me? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing alien encounters is author Preston Dennett. Preston, is there any pattern as to who has a UFO encounter?
Yes, and this took me years to figure out, because I really wondered about that. Why some people and why not others? And of course, one pattern that we do know of and has been long established is that it does follow certain family lines. So if your parents, grandparents, aunts, whoever have had an encounter, that increases your chances by at least 50%. More than 50% of people who have encounters, it is in their family. So that's a very prominent pattern. But I dug into my own files, looking for patterns. It was absolutely evenly divided between men and women. There's talk about negative blood type being a factor here, and perhaps a little bit Rh negative. But in my own files, people of every blood type, every ethnicity have been contacted. Whether you're Caucasian or Black or Pacific Islander or Asian, it doesn't matter. Everybody, Latino, you name it. So that's not a factor. People who are very, very young will have these experiences, and people who are quite elderly as well. It's not age, not education. There's a little evidence of geography, because if you live in a major UFO hotspot, your chances do go up. But it's strange, and I really struggled with this, because some people they don't have a history of encounters. And there's a whole category that seems opportunistic, where people are driving along a highway, a remote highway generally, late at night, and they have an encounter. So I think that can be a factor. But what I found was really interesting one day when I was interviewing a lady from Norway, because she had had Greys come into her room and heal her of a chronic back problem. She said it was really quite frightening. There were little Greys flipping her around, held this instrument on her back, which I've heard described from many others, and filed out through the wall and took off. She was peppering them with questions. They didn't answer anything. So I started asking her all these questions. And finally, I got to her profession. And she said, well, I'm a retired graphic artist, but right now, and I have been for years, I'm very active in my community with human rights and animal rights. She said, please don't use my name. I'm pretty well known here. And that rang a bell for me because I just interviewed Reverend Michael Carter, who also fights for human rights and against racism. And in fact, was given an award by the president for his work on this. And I instantly thought of, oh gosh, there's John Hunter Gray. He is also a social worker, and he's had encounters and healings as well. So I started looking through my files. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people who are doctors and nurses and environmentalists and musicians and inventors and people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. So that it's sort of a loose pattern, but the more I look into it, the more it's being confirmed. And people have actually asked this, like, why me? I said, well, it's because you are doing work to help others. So I think that is a factor.
Has the same person been abducted more than once?
Regularly. That is more the rule than the exception. Some people, it usually generally starts at around age 2 to 6 or 7, and continues regularly through adolescence and perhaps the teenage years, and drops off, and then in the 20s, 40s, 30s, and will drop off kind of exponentially as a person reaches their 60s or so. I would say the average person will have like 4 or 5 major encounters that they can remember. Pretty rare that it's a one-off. It does happen, but generally no. It's something that people deal with their entire lives. It's hard to say because some people don't remember it. Whitley Strieber is a good example. He was in not quite midlife, but close to it. He was an adult when he realized finally he was a contactee. It's very easy to go into denial and shelve these experiences, not think about them, debunk them to yourself, explain them away. So I think there's a lot of people out there who are contactees and probably have no idea of it.
That's a scary thought. Speaking of which, are there any hostile ETs that we know of that we've been encountered with?
In my own files, I have not really run into that. And I think this is a really sticky, controversial issue because there are people who have absolute negative experiences. And I've talked to them and I've asked them exactly what happened to them. And they have a very strong fear response because some people will have the same exact kind of experience and feel like, well, it wasn't negative to me. So I think fear plays a very powerful role in our perception, because the worst I hear is when a person is being physically examined, and it can be incredibly traumatic. And there are people who describe, some amount of pain with some of these examinations or even operations. That's pretty rare, and almost always they will relieve the pain. Not always. I am not convinced ETs are coming here to hurt, harm, cause fear, or take over. If they were truly hostile, I think with their advanced technology and their advanced abilities, we would already know this. I think there's a phenomenon called MILABs, military abductions, where our own governments are basically pushing a fear campaign and trying to portray ETs as negative and actually abducting people with fake abductions, particularly targeting contactees as well, which makes it very difficult for them, and using mind control techniques and drugs and hypnosis and the whole deal to fake a really negative encounter. And some of these stories get out there and people are saying, well, my experience was horrific. I believe you. Yes, it was. And I've interviewed some of these folks. One guy was a Marine and he flat out said, yeah, they did all kinds of experiments on me. He was at Camp Pendleton, a great guy, a very wonderful man, but ultimately decided, no, my encounters have been horrific. So he's confused about is ET doing this or is it something else, government agents? No, I don't think ETs are here to harm. And I know there are cases out there which people describe, this is what they did to me. It's, again, very controversial issue. This is my take on it. And I'll just close with this. A very in-depth look at the totality of onboard cases objectively shows a very prominent pattern of healing, guiding, teaching, warning, waking people up to our psychic abilities, which are all really good things for humanity. So my take on it is that overall, it's positive. I think there probably are some malevolent species out there. Look at us. We're here on a planet who don't treat each other that well. Are they traveling to Earth to take people? I don't know that I would endorse that idea. But yeah, controversial to say the least.
What would be the motivation of the government to make false abductions?
I wish I could get into their minds. I think it's all linked to the cover-up. I think incidents like Roswell, the Roswell crash in 1947, and many others where we have actually gained this technology, these craft, these bodies, is playing a role here, because it appears we do have this technology and it is being suppressed and withheld. And I think ultimately it comes down to greed, power, and control. I think there's a lot more to unpack with this. It's not really my area of expertise. So I focus more on the contactee era or subject. But it's a huge problem. And I think that's what's behind the cover-up and the idea that our governments want to paint this as a negative phenomena. Because just think what would happen if suddenly everyone on Earth developed their psychic abilities, became telepathic. We would overcome corruption. If everyone knew that we didn't have to live in a society with money enslaving us, how quickly the world would change. So ultimately, I think the ET threat is to the cabal, the Illuminati, the one percenters, secret government, call them what you want. And they're doing everything they can to suppress this information from reaching all humanity.
Well, we wouldn't want humanity to become empowered now, would we?
No, that's their greatest fear, I think, which is why the work you're doing is so important.
Thank you. So, were any witnesses given information by the ETs? You've talked about some of that. Is there any other information that they were given that really kind of changes the way we look at the world?
Oh yeah. Generally speaking, I've interviewed so many people, and those, as I mentioned earlier, fully conscious contactees are few and far between. Of the hundreds of people I've interviewed, it's maybe 5, 10 would be generous. But one contactee I mentioned earlier, Dolly Safran, I wrote a book called Symmetry. She's been given loads of information. That book is doing really well because I think it's really resonating with people who are searching for information about, what is daily life like with the ETs? What information do they have? I'm working on a sequel of that book where we're really doubling down on the science that she has learned from them. But they've absolutely do communicate and impart tons of information to people. 100%, yeah.
So you mentioned also that abductees, some tell, some don't, even if they do remember. How does that wager out? What percentage do tell and what percentage don't?
Oh gosh, I'd say the vast majority of people don't come forward. Those that do often don't want their name to be used. Particularly when I started in the late 1980s, the climate was much more hostile in terms of ridicule and skepticism and gaslighting, and it's still a huge problem. And some people, of course, have difficulty remembering, but the more, if you have a simple sighting, I think a person is much more likely to come forward. But if you have a humanoid in your bedroom or something, or you believe you were taken on board, people often don't even tell their own family, their spouse, perhaps. And I can tell you that when I do interview somebody, almost always, particularly if it's an extensive encounter, they will say something along the lines of some caveat, like, I don't do drugs. I've got no history of mental illness in my family. I've got a good job. I've got a good education. So these kinds of things turn up again and again.
So it's the wing nut thing, right? Don't want to be a wing nut.
Exactly. People are very, and I understand that, they don't want to be portrayed as a complete idiot, which, is, I think we're all victims of the UFO cover-up is what it comes down to. All of humanity has been essentially gaslit by our highest levels of our military, who are so disingenuous because they know it's real. They 100% know it's real.
Are there any connections with UFOs and the paranormal, such as Bigfoot and ghosts?
Oh, yes, absolutely. This is another thing that took me a while to unpack, because right from the beginning, I started to get reports from people who were like, oh, well, my house is haunted. I'm like, huh. Or, I've had near-death experiences. Lots of people, contactees, have had near-death experiences. Certainly not all of them, but it does turn up. And I got my first Bigfoot UFO case, which was very puzzling to me, when a gentleman described having a UFO land in his backyard, and the next day Bigfoot showed up.
Well, we're going to have to take a break. On that note, we're going to have to take another station break. Please stay with us as Pearson and I continue to explore UFOs and the mysteries surrounding them. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What do they know that we don't? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Preston Dennett. His website, prestondennett.weebly.com. Preston, we've been talking a little bit about the government cover-up. How large is it, and how long has it been going on?
It's worldwide, and it's been going on for at least 70 to 80 years, demonstrably. This is not speculation by any means, because groups like the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy actually sued the National Security Agency at one point, demanding openness and transparency, and received documents back that were entirely blacked out. I mean, every single page. So we know the cover-up is absolutely demonstrably true, and it appears that it is worldwide. And at the very highest levels of government, they are cooperating. I think it's tricky because, apparently some presidents are even out of the loop, or heads of state. And the folks behind the cover-up are hard to pinpoint, because it appears that they are the highest levels of the military industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned us against. But basically the intelligence agencies are absolutely behind this. It's no coincidence, I think, that intelligence agencies were formed coinciding exactly with the modern age of ufology, late 1940s. Also no coincidence that that's the atomic age, when suddenly we reached the ability to destroy our entire planet. So I think that's when ETs began a very vigorous publicity campaign, because they did go to government world leaders and asked them to stop exploding nuclear weapons, asked them to be truthful and transparent, which of course did not happen. And so I think they're conducting a grassroots campaign and showing themselves to as many people as possible. We have over 1 million. We have a worldwide database of over 1 million documented cases ETs have disclosed. So they've absolutely done their part. Really, the rest is up to us. This government cover-up is no joke. It is worldwide for sure.
It being that massive, how do we know it's not other ETs that are behind it?
I don't think there's any evidence of that whatsoever. And in fact, the ETs are working very hard to counter the cover-up. I wrote a book called Schoolyard UFO Encounters. You may have heard of the Zimbabwe case in 1996 at Ariel Elementary School. That's one of over 100 cases where UFOs have hovered or landed over schools like Westall High School in Melbourne, Australia, Hillsdale College in Michigan, Crestview Elementary School in Opelika, Florida, and many others. This points to what researchers call UFO displays. It could point to these major UFO waves that take place every couple of years over various locations on our planet. I also wrote another book, this is so interesting, of UFOs over drive-in theaters. It's another very clever way for ETs to introduce themselves to a fairly large audience. I've got over 100 cases of this, and I think there's probably 10 times that amount. So I think, yeah, ETs have worked very hard to announce their presence. Look at the Capitol flyover in 1952. Essentially, they would have landed, I think, on the White House lawn. It's so cliche. People ask, well, why don't they do that? They tried. What was our reaction? We scrambled jet fighters after them and tried to intercept them. So I think, it's our own fault that we haven't had open official contact.
With all the cell phones and cameras, are we seeing an increase in documentation?
Photographic evidence is very tricky. There's absolutely been some wonderful evidence. I would point to the Kumburgaz Turkey footage in 2006, 7, and 8. Some of the best footage out there. There is an enormous amount of photographic evidence, which I think is unimpeachable. These days, however, with the advent of AI and Photoshop, and the hoaxing is off the charts. You can't trust most of what you see on social media platforms. And I hate to say it, but it's just true. And I don't even really want to see these photographs that people are putting forth unless they're willing to stand behind it with an affidavit, identify themselves, and really go through the whole process of being investigated. Because yes, many people have captured things on cell phones, but it's just not trustworthy at this current day and age.
So, what does the government really know?
From what I understand, they know far more than UFO researchers, probably more than most contactees. It's my understanding that this subject is at the top of their list in terms of urgency and the amount of money spent towards it. So I think they know that they are ETs, that they are very advanced, that they do have these craft that can travel interstellar distances and are doing their level best to reverse engineer it, to the point that pretty much everything we see right now is probably reverse engineered craft. Because from what I understand, ETs are not right here right now. Our magnetic fields have collapsed to about 60%. They're 40% down. This is science. You can look up. Don't believe me? Do your own research. Don't believe anything I say. I would really encourage people to absolutely do your own research. Do your due diligence. But our governments have absolutely, and I think we know this from the huge number of whistleblower accounts and frankly first-hand sightings from people who describe what looks like not genuine ET craft, because they'll have rivets on it and bolts or make god-awful noises. We're flying these craft around, make no doubt about it. What people are often seeing is our own craft.
You mentioned the electromagnetic field of the Earth, and indeed, I know that thing's been wandering. They've even had to cease and desist landing airplanes, the big jetliners with remote means, okay, with autopilot, which used to be safer because the electromagnetic field of the Earth is becoming so erratic. Is this affecting the UFO encounters
100%.
and their ability to get here, I guess is the question.
Yeah, and I think this is why we've probably seen, over 100 cases of UFO crashes. Because people always say, well, if they're so advanced, how are they crashing? Well, accidents happen. And if you're using the magnetic field lines of our planet, gravitational magnetic field lines, to navigate, and they're that unstable, this is probably why they are crashing. So yeah, this is a huge problem, and it's had a profound effect, I think, on ET contact and why it's really not happening right now. This is what Dolly Saffron told me. She says they bugged out. And it's interesting because I've had a number of contactees tell me, like, no, I haven't had an encounter in the last 3 years. So I think this is an area that we need to do a lot more research into. But if you follow the UFO databases, you'll see an enormous drop-off of what I don't call them abductions because that is offensive to some of the people I've interviewed. I call them onboard experiences, which is a much more neutral term and accurate, I think. But yeah, huge drop-off over the last 3 years or so.
The sun's been going crazy too, unprecedented. Do you think that plays a part?
I do. From what I understand, we're facing a extinction level event, a coronal mass ejection, which will essentially drop down our electric grid to a point where it's irreparable, and perhaps a micronova. And I think this is one of the reasons behind the cover-up, because our government knows this, and they're moving into these DUMBs, deep underground military bases, collecting seeds and supplies and food, and trying to survive this, and kind of leaving all humanity to fend for itself. Absolutely, I think this is something everyone needs to do their research on. Look up, what's his name? Ben Davidson. He has a website, Space Weather Observers. You can see a lot of this information. He's kind of the go-to guy for this. But yeah, this is, from what I understand, a natural cycle that our planet goes through. And in prior iterations, we're lifted off by ETs. But in prior iterations, we are not as violent and warlike and greedy and divisive and all the troubles that we're going through, which has really prevented us from evolving spiritually to the point where we need to be to have open official contact.
I can see why they would be a little hesitant given the way we are operating right now. Do you think that the government will ever disclose these things?
I do not. And I hate to say it because when I got involved in this subject, people were saying, oh, disclosure's on the horizon. And it never came. Yes, we've seen steps recently, but it's very much a dog and pony show. It's very drip. The cover-up is still in place. They've showed us little fuzzy images when we know they have much better footage. Let's face it, fighter jets are riddled with cameras pointing in every direction. Ask any military guy they will tell you this. We have gun camera footage that is crisp and clear and absolutely conclusive, and that's never been released. In 1954, allegedly, there was a landing with President Eisenhower and numerous officials. That was filmed. Gordon Cooper was there when a UFO landed at Edwards Air Force Base and developed and saw the footage. That's never been released. There's so much that has never been released. I don't think they will ever willingly be open and truthful and transparent. And my message